What is quacking, everybody? So painting. Painting is an important part of Splatoon. It is the main core fundamental of this game. And I want to break down and highlight and cover a lot of stuff about painting that isn't in depth. And this is just going to be solely focused on painting. So that way this can just be focused on, easy to digest. So you understand, I'm not going to pair it with other tips or whatever things to look at. This is going to be solely focused on painting. Now, Splatoon's main mechanic is painting. You need to paint the map to move around, swim, move very fast, all these, different things. Painting is very important, and two of the biggest game modes, Turf War and Splat Zones, are the biggest game modes in this game that require you to paint. Now, the biggest issue that I run into with a lot of solo queue, or even just like watching lower level teams play, mid levels, and even sometimes like higher level teams, is sometimes they struggle with paint, sometimes it's the team comp, but painting is very important. When you watch high level play, when you watch these high level players play, they're just pumping out paint non-stop, and they're even pumping out paint with weapons that you think maybe couldn't, put that much paint out. I'll see tons of people, low mid-level players who are playing something like Bucket and they barely crack 1,000 paint when other people can crack 15k paint in one singular game. And that just all comes down to the person is, painting is still the main thing that you're going to be doing. It isn't just, oh, okay, I painted a little bit, now I'm just going to sit here and shark, or I'm just going to walk up and do something. No, you need to constantly be painting the entire time while you're playing this game. Granted, there are exceptions to that, like, yeah, if you're sharking, you're not going to be painting, or if you're doing other things, you're not going to be painting. Like, you don't need to be painting 24/7, but about 90 to 80% of the match, you should be painting. So there are various weapons that paint really well or don't paint very well, and Splash is one of the best painting weapons in the game. Gets, its special super fast with this paint, paired with some good abilities, but Splash paints really well and covers a lot of things. Likewise, if we look at something like, a blaster that doesn't paint very well, you're going to see that, oh, it just, it doesn't have that much range and it's just slow rate of fire. And that's kind of the biggest things about paint that people seem to misunderstand at times is, while yes, there are weapons that can paint a lot, like let's look at Dreadringer, for example. Dreadringer, yes, paints a lot. This weapon outputs paint like crazy. It paints very well. However, if you match it up against, a Splash, while yes, Dreadringer does have more range and it can hit Splash, if Splash just hangs back and just paints over Dreadringer's, long shots, if Dreadringer's at max range and I'm just out of the Dreadringer's range and it's, let's say it's painting in front of me right here, I'm just going to keep out painting it nonstop, and I'm probably built to get my crab fast, so the Dreadringer is going to help me get my crab, and then I'm going to pop crab. And the only reason why I'm outpainting that on a Splash is because Splash just has a higher rate of fire. It's going to outpaint the Dread, even if I match the same paint during the game, or I paint a little bit more and the Dread has 15k paint and I'm on 18k paint. With Splash, I just have a faster rate of fire. I'm going to outpaint a Dread. And that's where you come into things like team comps. You'll see comps that, don't paint as much or don't paint as hard, or they rely on a singular weapon to be the paint. Or so you'll have some teams will run a pencil with just a shot, but then they'll run something like, a blaster and a roller or a wiper or something like that. And it's just that kind of, struggles for paint a little bit, especially if you're running, something like a decav with a bubble. So you don't have a push in special, you just have the bubble. And then, you're also running a blaster, and then you're relying on a pencil to paint on top of, something like a T-Tech or a Splash. So that's where team comps and team balances come in, where you're matching up against certain teams and stuff like that. You have to be willing to switch your comp around. If your comp lacks paint, you need to apply paint to it. Your comp just can't be like a glass cannon. Oh, it's going to be, be this. It can be like that if you're really good at the game. You're just murdering everybody 24/7. But when you are playing against people in your skill range, it gets very hard. That's why, yes, you'll see higher level players, play, certain weapons and stuff like that, but they always have paint. Higher level teams always have paint. They have weapons that can back up with paint and stuff like that. Even regular Slosher can still paint a lot, and that's what a lot of higher level teams have. They just have these aggressive weapons that they just pump out paint nonstop, and they're just sitting there painting with their aggressive weapons. And then maybe you got a blaster that's just sitting there in your face killing people nonstop. However, while that works for them, it may not work for everybody. Some teams need to, use paint. Some teams may suffer and they just need to have paint because they can't output that kill pressure. A majority of the people who are playing this game, including you who's probably watching this right now, yeah, you're probably going to need paint on your team. You can't just brute force your way through the games, because you're most likely playing against people within your skill range. So it's going to always come down to, hey, like, what is our team comp going to be built around? Are we going to have, more paint focused weapons, or are we going to try to, risk it and run like a blaster with like a roller or something like that? So those are just very key details to keep in mind, and that's why solo queue can sometimes suck when you're running through solo queue, is because you're like, oh, I want to play, dualies. I'm just gonna sit and play, let's say you want to play dapples, and you're like, I'm gonna play some dapples, it's gonna be fun, and then you pair with like a blaster and a roller and like a goo tuber, and it's just like you got slow rate of fire, non-painting weapons. Like, how you, like, you're gonna get out comped at that point, because matchmaking doesn't favor you, and you're gonna go up against the team that has like an F Pro, a Splash, and a Dread Ringer with like a headit, and you're like, okay, well, yeah, that's GG's. So you always have to factor that in when you're, just playing in solo queue, if you get diffed, just because it's a comp difference. And that's something you should take into account as well. Like, yes, maybe you want to win and stuff like that, and you might give yourself a hard time, but sometimes in solo queue, you're just out comped. But when you're playing with a team in a tournament-based setting, you should definitely adapt and change on the fly, depending on what you're going up against. If the enemy team isn't running something super paint heavy, you can either match that energy, or you just run something that is very paint heavy and just outpaint them, and they're either going to change or they're just going to sink. Because if they're like, oh, well, this is my main weapon, well, they're just going to automatically lose because you just outpaint them in zones. So covering all that, weapons with rate of fire and range and all that other stuff. Now, how are you going to paint when you open up on a map? So if you're a paint support like Splash, you're going to be painting your way forward with your team, throwing your burst bombs, making sure you're getting paint with your burst bombs, and painting up for your team. Now, if you're something like a blaster or a bucket, you're going to be using your range. Like if you're a midline support, bucket, F Pro, just something with a good, mid-range, Slayer has a decent amount of range, Dread, something like that, you're going to like probably be back here just like slinging your paint non-stop. And that's how you should be painting. You should be painting forward. Always be facing forward, and cover your flanks as well, because some people can just, come through your flank, and oh, if you didn't paint over here, that's just easy for them to come through. And especially if they, paint this early on, if you're playing in a match and you're on the other side painting, but you don't paint this side, well, they painted this and then you didn't notice, and they're over here painting or whatever, and then boom, they just come over this way, jump up, and boom, and that's because you didn't paint this side. And one thing about paint is you want to check your map. Check your map to see where they're painting. That's the power of paint. You can see where enemies painting. You can see what way they're going to open up from spawn. So that's another little tidbit that you need to be careful of with paint. But for the most part, when you're trying to paint, you want to be painting forward. Obviously, there's painting for special if you're like, oh, I'm almost a crab, shoot off, whatever. But for the most part, you want to keep forward painting pressure on. I cannot stress that enough. There are so many people who just don't paint that much, or they just, again, tunnel vision on kills. That is one of the biggest things that happens in solo queue, and things that I see when watching tournaments. People just tunnel vision on kills. They'll sit here, they'll paint, and it's just like, okay, they'll paint up here on this side, and then they'll just run up here, shark, and then they'll see people, and they'll be like, okay, time to pop out and shoot, and then, they get one kill, but, let's say they're a blaster, boom, they get one kill. All the blaster will have is like a little line right here, and now they're trying to like paint up over here, but they got nowhere to go. And then let's say, a Dread Ringer just comes out of nowhere, or like an F Pro or something, and they miss a couple shots, but they shoot behind the blaster. Well, now the blaster has nowhere to go. The blaster doesn't have room to paint its feet, and it can't move backwards, and it's forced to fight, and then boom, it dies because it's in behind enemy lines. It has no paint. It's gonna die. And that's not something you want to be doing. You want to, make sure that you have a lot of paint moving forward and working together with your team for the flanks and having the paint down that you need to move around. And that's a very key thing. If you're a paint support playing splash, shot, or whatever, you always want to just keep moving yourself forward to help your slayers. And let's say, you're in advantage right now and they're up there. Get up there. Paint the enemy plat so your slayers can get up there and help you too. Obviously, your slayers are going to be painting. This is a team game. Everyone should be painting. Everyone should be getting up here. If you're a bucket, you should be painting, getting over these ledges. That's what buckets are good at. Everyone should just be up here just painting nonstop and, pushing forward. Now, some things that I see people do that you really shouldn't be focused on too much is painting your base like up here, these little extra tidbits. While yes, if you're not jumping in, you should be painting all the time. That is the number one thing. If you're swimming back to mid, if you're not jumping into people, keep painting. Try and paint, try and get everything painted as much as you can while you're moving forward. Just keep it moving, move sideways, and moving sideways is the best way to get your your paint meter up, because if you're just painting forward and walking like this, you're not going to be building much of a meter. So I'm going to show what that looks like. I'm going to burn my crab here, and you're just going to want to be moving to the side when you're doing this. You just want to just sit there and strafe. So this area isn't painted. You walk like this, and you notice how your meter goes up a little bit more like that. Now, if you just paint doing this, it's a little bit slower because I'm painting in front of myself. I'm just slowly painting myself. You can see how slow my meter goes up, but if I paint like this, my meter goes up faster. And this is how you want to be painting when you're, coming out of spawn, when you're swimming or whatever. You want to be painting sideways. You want to keep, obviously paint forward, throw your bombs forward, but be painting sideways like this as well to get your special back faster. Things you really shouldn't be doing when you're painting is just like painting these like little corners. Like if you're just like, oh, I need these, you see like these little things and you got like OCD or whatever, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna paint it. Don't do that. Don't do that. You're just wasting time. You're not painting forward. You're not with your team. If you find yourself, if you're watching your games back and you find yourself, you're like, oh, I'm just painting, but you see 3 of your teammates up here in the VODs just like painting forward, that's where you should be. You should be with them. You should be up here painting with them, doing what they're doing with them, is painting forward. Don't paint these, little crevices where it's just like, oh, gotta get this little thing. You should not be doing that. This is not a painting. This is a match. You need to be moving forward and keeping as much of an advantage as you can. Now, let's say you're on defense. Let's say the enemy team's pushing you. Well, just keep trying to paint over their paint and maneuver around it. Be respectful of, their range if they got a pen or whatever and they're right here, but constantly keep painting and apply the pressure. It's easy for you to come back and outpaint them than it is for them to have to, come back. Because if you, let's say there's a blaster, they get a little bit greedy and, you paint it over their feet and kill them. Boom. Now you have that area painted and you can keep pushing forward, because now it's easier for you to have paint control because your team's right there. If someone dies on your team, they're going to come back faster. So you're just keeping the paint forward when you're on defense. Just still, no matter what, just try and keep the paint moving forward. Obviously be very cautious. Watch, where the enemy is, all that, regular stuff. I'll cover more stuff like that in a future video, but keep throwing the paint forward. Throw burst bombs. Do whatever you need to do to get paint in your base if someone is in your base. Now, one little tidbit I did want to cover is the power of a single drop of ink. This single drop of ink can mess your day up. The amount of times that I'm sitting here, I'm fighting an enemy and I move back and I have a single drop of ink just, touch me. It's just like, oh, I'm in here, boom, that little drop of ink slows you down. You take the chip damage and boom, you're dead. And that's how powerful paint is in this game. Even this little tiny sliver of just moving through can determine, if I'm sitting here shooting and then I step in it and that slows down my movement and poof, I'm gone. That's it. The amount of times I've been swimming and it's just like, oh, you go to squid roll, boom, you squid roll into enemy ink. And it's just like, wow, if I was just right there. And that's how powerful painting is in this game. So I hope this was a comprehensive breakdown of paint. The amount of times I see people just not paint in any type of match. They just refuse to paint. They come out with low paint score. You have people, I've seen people on shooters who have like below 1,000 paint. And I hope this is helpful to those people and just how important paint really is in, the entirety of the game as the main mechanic. Always make sure you're painting forward, cover your sides, cover your flanks with paint, and don't just sit there and try and paint little areas and keep moving forward. The power of this little bit of ink is a lot. And also make sure you have a very cohesive team comp that has enough paint to thrive in a lot of scenarios. And also, you know, understanding what weapons can do what. Don't be scared of a Dread Ringer just because it has more range. Back up out of its range and use the paint that it's laying down to outpaint it. You know, you're going to outpaint a Dread Ringer with a shooter, you know. Be aware of, you know, your rate of fire when you're painting and all that other stuff. So that way, you know, you don't back yourself into a corner and, you know, die. So that's going to be all from me today. I hope this video was helpful. If you liked it, subscribe. I greatly appreciate it. I will come out with more in the future. I will see you in the next one. Take care. Peace.